January 14, 2016. A statement released.
By Grabthar's hammer. What to say?
11 words. Alan Rickman has died after a short illness at the age of 69. 11 words. For a man whose voice alone could stop a room. Whose silences carried more weight than most actors' entire performances. Whose presence on screen made everything around him sharper and more alive.
I like a bit of danger to be involved in the work, some size to the challenge, so that was definitely there because it was such a big movie to be involved in.
11 words. And a short illness. That is what the controlled narrative gave you. Short illness. As if pancreatic cancer is something that arrives quietly on a Tuesday and leaves by the weekend. As if the man who spent 15 years carrying one of cinema's most carefully guarded secrets did not spend his final year fighting something that the people closest to him had known about and chosen to protect from public view. Today we are opening that door. Not to sensationalize a man who deserved better than sensation. But because the real story of Alan Rickman's final years and what he chose to do with the time he knew was running out is more powerful than anything the official statements ever said. And because understanding what he carried privately changes how you see every single performance he ever gave. Start with the secret. Not the cancer. The other one. The one he kept for 15 years before a single frame of Harry Potter ever reached a cinema screen. J.K. Rowling called him before filming began on the first film. She told him the truth about Severus Snape. The whole truth. Not the version audiences would spend a decade believing. Not the cold calculating professor who tormented Harry Potter with barely concealed hatred. The real truth. She told him about Lily. She told him about Always. She told him that the man audiences were going to spend 8 films despising was actually a man who had loved one woman his entire life. Who had watched her die. Who had agreed to protect her son not out of loyalty to Dumbledore or obligation to the Order but out of a grief so complete and so private that he built an entire personality around containing it. Alan Rickman took that secret. And he carried it into every single scene he ever filmed as Snape. For 15 years. While directors questioned his choices. While producers wondered why he was playing certain moments with such specific restraint. While audiences debated whether Snape was villain or something more complicated. Rickman knew. He always knew. And he could not tell anyone. That is not acting. That is a man using a fictional secret to practice the discipline of keeping a real one. Because by the time the final Harry Potter film was released in 2011, Alan Rickman had been keeping another secret entirely. Go back to West London. 1946. A boy named Alan Sidney Patrick Rickman born into a family that is about to learn what loss costs. His father dies when Alan is 8 years old. 4 children. 1 mother. No money. No safety net. Just a woman who somehow holds it together because the alternative is not an option she is willing to consider. That early loss does something to Alan Rickman that no drama school could replicate. It teaches him what it looks like when someone is carrying something devastating while functioning completely normally in the world around them. His mother did it every day. He watched her do it. He filed it away. And 40 years later when a diagnosis arrived that he was not going to share with the world because sharing it would shift every conversation from his work to his illness and that was not how he intended to spend whatever time remained. He already knew how to carry something that heavy without letting it show. His mother taught him. He did not arrive in the industry young and hungry. He trained as a graphic designer first. Spent years working in design before something pulled him back to what he had always known was actually his purpose. At 26 he applied to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. Most actors his age were already chasing their second or third significant role. Rickman was starting from the beginning. Not because he was late. Because he refused to begin until he was ready to do it properly. That discipline defined everything that came after. The Royal Shakespeare Company. Years on stage building a craft that most film actors never develop because film does not require the same relationship with language and silence and the specific weight of applause that theater demands. By the time cinema found him he was 41 years old. And he arrived not as a promising newcomer but as a fully formed artist who had spent 2 decades becoming exactly what he needed to be before he was willing to let anyone watch. His film debut was Hans Gruber in Die Hard. A 40-foot fall. His very first scene on his very first film. The crew told him he would be released on 3. They let go on too. That flash of genuine disbelief frozen on his face in one of cinema's most iconic moments was not acting. It was real shock from a man who had spent his entire career building perfect control suddenly having it stripped from him in a fraction of a second. And what makes that moment quietly devastating in retrospect is this. 28 years later, the man who was so defined by control would face something that stripped it from him again. Permanently. And this time there was no camera to capture the expression. Here is what the official timeline of Alan Rickman's final years does not tell you. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2015. 1 year before he died. 1 year during which he continued working. Continued showing up. Continued giving everything the work required while carrying the knowledge of his own mortality into every room he entered. Eye in the Sky. His final completed film. Released in 2016 after his death. He plays a military officer navigating the moral weight of modern warfare. A man who must make decisions that carry permanent consequences. Who must hold the weight of those decisions without the luxury of visible emotion. Watch that performance knowing what he was carrying while he gave it. Watch the measured words. The quiet tension. The heavy awareness of consequence. That is not simply a character making difficult decisions. That is Alan Rickman at 69 years old with pancreatic cancer filming scenes about mortality and consequence and the specific burden of knowing something that the people around you do not. Every choice he makes in that film lands differently when you understand what was happening on the other side of the camera. Now here is the moment that changes everything. The detail that the brief official statements and the warm tribute pieces and the anniversary coverage have never fully examined. The people closest to Alan Rickman knew. His wife Rima Horton knew. They had been together since they were teenagers. Married finally in 2012 after decades of partnership that required no ceremony to be real. She was there for every stage of the diagnosis. Every decision about treatment. Every choice about what to tell and what to protect. The question that nobody in the coverage has ever asked directly is this. What is it like to watch someone you have loved since you were a teenager choose to face the end of his life with the same discipline and restraint he brought to every role he ever played? Rima Horton has never given a detailed public interview about those final months. That silence is her right. But it is also the loudest possible statement about who Alan Rickman was. He protected her privacy the way he protected his own. The way he protected Snape's secret. The way he protected his mother's dignity as a woman raising 4 children alone after loss. He understood that some things are diminished by being said out loud. So he chose silence. Even at the end. Even when silence cost him the sympathy and the public acknowledgement that most people in his position would have accepted. He chose to be seen as a working actor until he could not work anymore. Not as a man who was dying. January 14, 2016. The statement goes out. And something genuinely strange happens in the hours that follow. The grief is immediate and overwhelming, but it has a specific quality that is different from the grief that follows most celebrity deaths. It is personal. Not in the parasocial way that confuses fame with relationship. Personal in the way that happens when someone has been quietly present in your life across decades without ever demanding that you notice them. Die Hard every Christmas. Love Actually every winter. Snape across 8 films and a decade of growing up alongside a story that shaped a generation. People were not grieving a celebrity. They were grieving someone they had trusted. Someone who had given them performances that required them to feel things they did not expect to feel. Someone who had never once broken that trust by giving less than everything the work required. Even at the end. Even while carrying something nobody knew about. He kept the trust. Here is what Alan Rickman's story actually teaches you about Hollywood when you look at it clearly. The industry rewards the performance of accessibility. The press tour. The talk show appearance. The carefully managed revelation of personal struggle time to coincide with a release that needs the publicity. Alan Rickman refused every version of that transaction. He did not perform his grief. Did not perform his illness. Did not perform his death. He simply lived it. Worked through it. Protected the people around him from having to perform their responses to it while it was still happening. And in doing so he quietly exposed something about the entertainment industry's relationship with the people it builds into icons. The machine wants access. It wants the story. The struggle. The vulnerable moment that makes the star seem human and therefore more marketable. Rickman denied it that access. Not out of arrogance. Out of the same discipline he brought to every pause. Every silence. Every moment where a lesser actor would have filled the space with noise and he chose instead to let the space speak. The scariest part of Alan Rickman's story is not that he died. Everyone dies. The scariest part is how many people in Hollywood knew he was sick and maintained the silence he asked for. In an industry built on leaks and managed revelations and the strategic deployment of personal information for maximum publicity impact, nobody said a word. Because he asked them not to. And they respected him enough to honor that request. Think about how rare that is. Think about how much a person has to have given to the people around them for that kind of loyalty to exist in an environment that treats personal information as currency. Alan Rickman spent his entire career giving. To the work. To his co-stars. To the younger actors he quietly protected and guided and treated as equals when the industry would have allowed him to treat them as anything but. And at the end when he needed something in return, they gave it back. Every single one of them held the silence he asked for. That is not a Hollywood story. That is a human story. About what happens when someone spends a life giving more than they take. And about how the industry we built to celebrate talent so rarely deserves the people it is lucky enough to contain. Alan Rickman was not just one of the greatest actors of his generation. He was one of the most privately decent human beings that generation produced. And the fact that we are still talking about him 10 years after his death, still watching those performances, still feeling something stir when that voice appears on a screen, is not because he was famous. It is because he was real. In an industry that runs on performance, he was always genuinely real. And that is the thing that cannot be manufactured, cannot be managed, cannot be replaced. Subscribe. Because the next story we are telling is about another person who chose silence when the industry wanted noise. And what that silence ultimately cost them. You are not ready for it.